Lord Jesus Christ. That is the intro for my parish. I was supposed to put up the intro for the class, but okay. I am mostly a 21st century priest. Every once in a while, even I have little tech hiccups. Let me see if I can get my smiling face in here a little bit better. All right, lovely. So today we are going to talk about love, children, and wealth, basically social ethics and the church's sacramental tradition, and specifically our understanding of marriage. And we're going to look at some of the challenges facing married couples today. And we're going to conclude by talking about the implications of our theology for social ethics. So let's get into that, shall we? All right. I'm looking forward to this. This is one of my favorite topics. Yes, I realize having favorite topics in social ethics makes me a dweeb, but I'm good with it. It's the way Jesus made me. All right, let's go on. So we're going to focus here on three broad areas. We're going to look at the biblical and canonical teaching on marriage. And what we're going to see is that marriage is central to salvation history. We're then going to look at some of the contemporary challenges to the Orthodox understanding of marriage, and that is specifically things like same-sex marriage and contraception. And then we will conclude by talking about some of the economic implications of marriage, and specifically of the couple balancing love for each other with their responsibility towards children, and the importance of avoiding the pursuit of wealth at the expense of family well-being. So let's get into that, if we could, please. The Orthodox Church service of crowning is often the first experience many people have of the church's liturgical tradition. The other thing that people have first experience they have is the funeral service. And I actually almost used the funeral service, but I thought marriage was a little bit more cheerful. In any case, the marriage service is beautiful, and while by Orthodox standards not particularly long, it certainly is not 10 minutes in front of the justice of the peace. Years ago, I did a wedding for a couple. They were both converts to the church, and lovely young couple. At the end of it, the bride's uncle came up to me. He's a big redneck kind of guy. I'm not sure whether or not he was packing, whether or not he was carrying, but he came up to me and he said, in his cowboy hat and his boots, and he said, "Father Gregory, you did my niece proud, and I just want to shake your hand." And he did, and he shook my hand in a manner which suggested to me that had I not done his niece proud, there would have been problems. But in any case, when we talk, when we shouldn't get so swept up by the beauty and the solemnity of our service that we overlook the theology of marriage and family life embodied in our prayers because that's what we're seeing, is that this is an embodiment, an expression of the faith of the church as it pertains to marriage and family life. So let's look a little bit more at that, shall we? And I'm going to just get my beautiful face out. There we go. In the service, after invoking God as creator, the prayers highlight a couple of themes that are worth bearing in mind. The creation of Adam the creation of Eve from Adam's rib, and then the many good things that are part of marriage: procreation, babies, but also labor and fidelity of the spouses to each other. In other words, in the service, we are focusing in on not on these things, that man and woman were made for each other, that they have a natural, that they share a nature. We say in more philosophical theology that they are called by God to procreate, to have children, and that they are to work and to be faithful to each other. prayer reads, O God, most pure, author of all creation, who through your man-befriending love transformed a rib of Adam, the forefather, into a woman, and blessed them and said, increase and multiply and have dominion over the earth, and by the conjoining declared them both to be one member. For because of this, a man shall forsake his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. And whom God has joined together, let not man put asunder. So we all are probably familiar with that prayer. So in any case, here's what we hear in the prayer. That God is the creator, he is the author of all creation, and he creates out of his man-befriending love. He creates the woman by transforming a rib of Adam so that Adam has a fit helpmate, and he blesses them to increase and multiply, that is, to have children. There is unity in marriage. The service declares them to be one member. And that comes, interestingly enough, at a certain cost. I become one with my wife by, in some way, separating myself from my family of origin. So cleaving unto my wife requires a certain kind of estrangement from my family. And finally, that marriage is indissoluble. That what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. So hearing the good things associated with it, with marriage, you might now be asking yourself, well, what does marriage have to do with the church's social ethics and witness? Well, let's talk about that. First of all, as the text of the service makes clear, marriage has always been central to God's plan for humanity. Marriage, we learn, is both a human and a Christian vocation. We hear this when the celebrant recalls how God blessed Abraham and made him the father of many nations by healing Sarah of her infertility. How he gave Esau and Jacob to their parents Isaac and Rebekah and raised up the 12 patriarchs from Jacob and Rachel. We hear in the prayer, he bestowed Ephraim and Manasseh on Joseph and his wife. And then moving to the New Testament, the prayer reminds us of John the Baptist, the offspring of Zacharias and Elizabeth, whom God declared the forerunner of Jesus before declaring the centrality of marriage and family life in salvation history. In other words, when we hear the prayer, we discover that marriage is not secondary either to creation or life in Christ. That this marriage is woven in from the beginning, both to our humanity and to our faith as Orthodox Christians. This becomes even more explicit in the New Testament. Marriage and family life are all revealed to be part of God's saving work. For example, God raises up the ever Virgin Mary from the root of Jesse by his presence. Jesus blesses the marriage in Cana, and heaven itself is described as a wedding feast in the book of Revelation. In other words, marriage makes or reveals, something popped up on my screen here. Marriage reveals the conjugal character of salvation. Again, from the prayer of the church. Out of the root of Jesse, according to the flesh, God produced the ever Virgin Mary, and from her were incarnate, born for the salvation of the human race. And from her were incarnate, born for the salvation of the human race, our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ. It goes on to say, Christ, through your unspeakable grace and plentiful goodness, were present in Cana of Galilee and blessed the marriage there, that you might show a lawful union, and a generation therefrom is according to your will. Do you yourself, O most holy Master, accept the prayer of us, your servants, and as you were present there, be present also here with your invisible protection. So that is a very strong statement of the importance of marriage, not just as a human institution, but as a sacrament of the church. This is not something secondary, which is one of the reasons why we when we talk about social ethics and social witness, we look first and foremost to marriage, not because marriage exhausts the social witness, but because marriage is, in fact, we might say that the foundation or the first expression of the church's social witness. People may not always have access to the Orthodox Church. For whatever reason, they may not come at liturgy. That's always a tension I have with the other chaplains on campus. Father Gregory, tell us more about the tradition of the Orthodox Church. And it's like, well, come to liturgy. Well, give us a lecture. I don't want, well, but that's really not helpful. Come and see is what Jesus says, not sit and read or sit and listen. So come and see. But for most people, for the vast majority of people, their first contact with the Orthodox Church, in the sense of this living community, is going to be through meeting individual Orthodox Christians and Orthodox families. So that's where the church's witness begins, is in the family. So let's move on a little bit. Well, and I went one slide too much. Yep, got to go back. So, this is very strange. I missed a slide. Okay. Well, I'm not sure how that happened. Let's see. Nope. Okay. So in any case, the Old Testament and New Testament are the context within which the church asks God to bless the couple's marriage and grant them a peaceful life, length of days, chastity, love for one another in a bond of peace, offspring, long-lived, fair fame by reason of their children, and a crown of glory that does not fade away. In the church's blessing of marriage, we ask that the couple have a peaceful life, a peaceful and a long life, that they be chaste, that they be models of integrity, both and love for one another, and so for the world, that their children live a long life, and that they be fair, which is fair and have fair fame, and by which we mean that their children be exemplars of the life of virtue, and all of this so that the couple will enjoy a crown of glory that does not fade away. Moving from what we asked for in the service, I want to focus now on some of the challenges we face in communicating the Orthodox understanding of marriage. My Irish family members had a phrase. I'll clean it up a little bit, but they'll talk about how someone would spit in the stew. You can figure out what they meant instead of spit. And it was this idea that you can create this beautiful meal and someone can come along, just spit in it and ruin it. Well, this is the challenge I think we face in proclaiming the gospel, but also proclaiming our social ethics, or bearing our social witness, is because we are surrounded by people who, in the name of Christ, maybe with the utmost of sincerity, give partial expression to the gospel. And so we're fighting sort of a two-front battle. On the one hand, we're trying to witness to what is authentic in the gospel. What is the authentic social witness of the gospel? Well, that's the tradition of the Orthodox Church, and specifically the life of the church. But we're doing this in a context in which there are all of these half expressed and sometimes simply erroneous understandings of the social witness, social Christian witness, that we need to correct. So we're trying to say, hey, this is the truth, and this is what you may have wrong because someone has given you sort of a half idea. The challenge with that is this: it can sometimes take a very long time, require a great deal of effort to correct the kind of damage that someone can do just in 30 seconds. And so the situation we find ourselves in is this: for many people, including many Orthodox Christians, marriage is simply an affirmation of the love between two or now more people. The cultural debate about expanding civil marriage to include same-sex couples is based on the idea that marriage is about, or maybe better, is for, the well-being and happiness of adults. If children are involved at all, they are subsumed under the category of the well-being of adults. In other words, marriage is about the couple, and whether or not they have children is really fundamentally about the couple. If children will make them happy, then they should have children. And if they can't have children, then it's not just that they might want to adopt, but they might want to engage in avail themselves of reproductive technology to have a child. And it's one thing if we're talking about correcting a medical difficulty between a husband and a wife, or for whatever reason, for medical reasons they're not able to have a child, and seeing what you can do to help them have that child. It's another thing, though, when reproductive technology, and this is really where the problem becomes clearest, is used by either same-sex couples or a single individual simply because they want a child. That's where the problem becomes, and that's where we begin to see that, in fact, we have come to the point where children are, for many people, simply an accessory for marriage, and that's really quite horrible. In contrast to that, though, the church says, again, God created marriage in the beginning, and this means that marriage and family life are natural to us. So we understand why, for example, someone who's single or a same-sex couple might want to have a child. There's that natural desire for children, but it's not that desire is embodied in a particular kind of relationship, which we call marriage, which is between a man and a woman, and it is meant to be for life. So when we take it out of that context, when we take procreation out of that context, then we discover that procreation becomes something else, and we discover that our focus is no longer on obedience to the natural law, but on the desire to, as we'll see in a moment, sort of twist marriage to our own expectations of what God should have done, which is always dangerous. So, as we read in the basis, even though marriage and family life is natural to us, because of our fallen nature, our understanding and experience of marriage is often distorted. And this is, whether we're talking about non-believers or Catholics, Protestants, people outside the church, if we're talking about Orthodox Christians, whether we're talking about straight couples, gay couples, we all of us carry around distorted understandings of marriage because we are all of us sinners. And so necessarily we must all of us at one time or another struggle to accept the divine law in all its fullness as it pertains to marriage and even the whole of human life, as we read in the basis. So when we say that people have dissonant or deficient understandings of marriage, we have to be conscious of the fact that also includes us. All right, we also come to the conversation with distortions that need to be corrected because we're still sinners, even though we're Orthodox Christians. All right, let's look now a little bit at the historical and canonical perspective on marriage. We do live in a time in which individual couples and even whole societies really have failed to honor marriage. On the one hand, the church has never disparaged marriage and has gone so far as to denounce those who abase marriage out of a wrongly understood sense of sexual purity. But, so the first thing we have to say is that when you look at the history of marriage in the church, and here's a nice sort of some of the bullet points, we've always thought marriage was fundamentally a good thing. As we read in the basis, marriage is the union of man and woman, a communion of life participation together in the divine and human law. What's interesting about this is that this shows up in the basis after a quote from pagan Roman jurisprudence. In other words, we simply took over the understanding of marriage that that would have been current in late antiquity among the pagans. We looked and said, this is correct. This is what marriage is. It is a union between a man and a woman. What we did, though, is not only take over that definition, but we added to it, and specifically the idea that the sacrament of matrimony elevates human love to a sacramental level, involving two persons freely and equally bound by God. Mystically, man and woman become one, as emphasized in the rite of matrimony. Or as we read in For the Life of the World, the sacrament of love, or human love raised into the world of the sacramental, is the definition of marriage. It is only the sacrament marriage is the only sacrament, it goes on to say, that involves two persons freely and equally bound to one another by God. Mystically, man and woman, husband and wife, become one, as the rite of matrimony says, yoke them in oneness of mind, crown them in one flesh. And here's this lovely picture of the couple kissing. But we know from the marriage rite service that the sign that the couple is being yoked into one is in fact the crown. That crown is the crown that signifies that they are king and queen of their own household. That it is also a crown that signifies the ascetical struggle of becoming one flesh, of learning how to love one another. And as a consequence, it is also the martyr's crown, that it is that the couple bears witness, but this is a witness that comes through the couple bears witness to the love Christ has for the church, but this witness, again, is rooted in ascetical struggle. So it really is much more than simply, hey, these two kids are in love, isn't it great? And don't we all feel good about that? I mean, by all means, let's feel good about it. Let's go to the wedding. Let's go to the celebration. Let's celebrate with the couple and their families. But let's also keep in mind that there is this very sober struggle that is involved in marriage, and that this sober struggle is at the heart of our social witness. Because when people ask us, what does it mean to say that Christ loves me? What does it mean for me to say that I reciprocate that love? We should be able to say, well, look at this married couple, see how they love one another, see everything that goes in to their love for one another. This is what it means to love Christ, to love God with all our heart and with all our soul, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. So marriage has that really important place in the church's social witness. There is also, and this is I think one of the great insights in For the Life of the World, an ascetical aspect to parenthood. While both the basis and For the Life of the World address the pastoral challenges of marriage and emphasize procreation within the unitive dimension of marriage, that is, being open to new life within the context of husband and wife loving each other. For the Life of the World really does do, I think, a much better job on emphasizing the pastoral challenges facing marriage, especially when it comes to procreation. There is nothing sentimental or romantic about how For the Life of the World understands what it means to be for the couple to become parents. We read in For the Life of the World, the marriage rite includes many petitions for the eventual bearing of children, including the psalmist's prayer that the newly married couple will live to see their children's children. Some of the children who enrich the new household created by marriage may be the fruit of the couple's sexual union, while others may be adopted and still others may be fostered. But all are equally welcome within the sanctuary of the family and the body of the church. The document goes on to say, parenthood is a distinctively privileged symbol of love's transfiguring power, as well as God's love for his creatures. Children themselves are a blessing, and that the vocation of the family as a whole is to create a kind of polity, a microcosm emblematic of a redeemed creation, and therefore also a place of hospitality for those outside its immediate circles. In other words, what we're getting at in the document is precisely this. By being open to new life, by having children, whether through procreation or adoption or fostering, the couple bears witness to God's redemptive and creative and redemptive love for the world. But as part of that, there's also the expectation that they will extend hospitality to those outside the immediate circle of their own family or families. In other words, that their table will be a place of hospitality for other people. Again, if you're thinking about the church's social witness and trying to understand what our social ethics are, well, this is a really good starting point. Again, and I've said before, not to disparage public policy, but those policy arguments always need to happen within the context of our emphasizing the centrality of not just the family as an abstract social institution, but like we do with the saints, being able to point to specific families, specific married couples, specific parents, specific children who manifest what it means to be a Christian. Now, while I think it's true to say, as Flo does, true love is always fruitful, we need to keep in mind that this fruitfulness is not only expressed through children. It can be manifest, as the document said, through the diverse gifts of the Spirit, through hospitality, through service, through common creative efforts of countless kinds. And so while the family is the model of the church's social witness, it is not so exclusively. We look to the family again and again to understand how it is that we are to bear witness to Jesus Christ. So the family has an ongoing evangelical role in the life of the church. But for the life of the world also reminds us that in a fallen world, every blessing is haunted by the curse of Adam and Eve. This means, and as I've alluded to before, that parenthood too is a field of ascetic labor, not only because parents must sacrifice their own interests for those of their children, which can be a great joy in itself, but because parents must also endure the sufferings and fears and sadnesses of their children, or recognize at times their own failures in raising their children. So, in other words, it's hard to be a mom and dad. And that has to be built into the conversation. Again, we should not romanticize to couples what it means to be parents. We understand that as in the love between husband and wife, so father and mother's love for their children really requires an ascetical effort. But again, we go back to just as like marriage itself. So parenthood is also a touchstone of the church's social witness. If we are to exercise the gifts that God has given us in a way which is fruitful for ourselves and for other people, we need to understand that this is an ascetic practice. So here's a quick summary of the things that we focused on. If you want to stop the video for a second, you can copy that down. But this is what we've said. Focusing on the pastoral challenges in marriage means, on one hand, focusing on the challenges to the institution of marriage itself. But it also means keeping in mind the challenges that even happen in a healthy Orthodox marriage. In other words, even if the culture supported our understanding of marriage in all its particulars, marriage and family life would still be an ascetical struggle. Why? Because we're fallen, yes, but because frankly, love is always difficult. For the Life of the World does talk about some, I mean, to repeat, so we hear something for the Life of the World. Parenthood is a distinctively privileged symbol of love's transfiguring power, as well as God's love for his creatures. Children themselves are a blessing that the vocation of the family as a whole, and that the vocation of the family as a whole is to create a kind of polity, a microcosm emblematic of a redeemed creation. I'm just repeating what we heard a moment ago. And therefore also a place of hospitality for those outside its immediate circle. So again, marriage, even in a Christian culture, has its own struggles. Parenthood, even in a Christian culture and a healthy marriage, brings its own struggles. And we need to always keep that in mind, not only for the sake of the couple, but also for the fact that, our bearing witness to the gospel is always going to be hard, and it is going to require effort on my part. And that said, when we invite people into the life of the church, we are inviting them into that life of ascetical struggle. However, now we can say, hey, that ascetical struggle that goes with being an Orthodox Christian is not foreign to you. You already know what that is because you're married, or because you have children, or because you go to work every day, or you're faithful to you take care of your parents, or you love your brothers and sisters, or you're hospitable to your neighbors. So it's important that when we talk about that ascetic struggle as intrinsic to the Christian life, we point out that this ascetical struggle is not foreign to even the non-believer. It is simply a part of healthy human flourishing. I want to now change the topic just a little bit. Now I want to look at just some of the one of the great challenges that comes up in the life of the church, pastoral life of the church, and that is the question of contraception, and specifically artificial contraception. Both basis of the social concept and for the life of the world affirm, as we read in For the Life of the World, that the Orthodox Church has no dogmatic objection to the use of safe, non-abortifacient contraceptives within the context of married life, not as an ideal or as a permanent arrangement, but as a provisional concession to necessity. So one of the things that I noticed that struck me the very first time I read that was the use of the phrase that we don't have a dogmatic objection. But I recalled, as I thought about it, that there are these streams within Roman Catholic or Catholic social teaching where we have people there. We hear people who will talk about the Roman Church's rejection of contraception is not just a moral truth, but dogmatic and must be held as infallible. So I think that's what For the Life of the World is reacting to, this idea that contraception is not just morally problematic, but basically heresy. And I think that is a bridge too far. Another word that it's important to focus on is that the church allows not the use of non-abortifacient forms of contraception. So we rule out, for example, the intrauterine device, which works at least in part by preventing implantation of the fertilized egg. But there is some question as to whether or not some forms of anti-ovulant pills also would prevent implantation of the fertilized egg. That's a little bit more problematic. So the kinds of contraception that the church blesses are, I think, again, are things like condoms, spermicidal foams, diaphragms, and anti and chemical and pills, the pill, if it doesn't result in the destruction of the fertilized egg. I realize that's probably more explicit than you're used to from a priest, but you got to know what these things are. All right. So the things that we do rule out in an absolute sense, with absolute clarity, are things like the IUD, the intrauterine device that works by preventing implantation. Our allowance for some forms of contraception, however, and this is important to stress, is not to say that this is ideal. It is in the phrasing of the basis a concession to human weakness. In other words, you can't really live the church's ascetical discipline, and that's okay. We're not mad at you. You're doing the best you can. So if you need to use condoms or diaphragm, or for that matter, natural family planning, you can do that. But ideally, what you should be doing is just keeping the church's ascetical practice on intimacy and marriage. All those little pink squares, those are non-intimacy days, and and then just remain open to life throughout the in other contexts. But again, that's not something, as For the Life of the World points out, that is a starting point for most couples, which is why we read in the basis, in defining their attitude towards the non-abortive contraceptives, Christian spouses should remember that human reproduction is one of the divine purposes of the divinely established marital union, and that the deliberate refusal of childbirth is on egoistic grounds devalues marriage and is a definite sin. So, if a couple comes and says to you, Father John, Father Basil, Father Mikola, my wife and I are newly married, and golly, we'd really like to get a better television or a bigger car, so we thought we'd hold off on children. I wouldn't recommend you say, you castigate them, yell at them, but that's not acceptable. I want more stuff is not a reason to have babies, to not have babies. I don't have what I need to support a child, or that's a different set, a different thing. But to simply refuse to have children because you don't want to be bothered or you want to do something else, that's sinful. It's interesting. A number of years ago, I was teaching an undergraduate class at Duquesne University, and I was teaching ethics. And one of the students asked about how in the Orthodox Church we prepare people for marriage, and I gave a quick summary. And at one point I said, I always ask them how many children they want, and if they say they don't want any children, well, then everything comes to a halt. And the students were Catholic students were absolutely just appalled that I would say that. I said, well, yeah, but the point of marriage is to have children. The point of marriage are babies. It's not the only point, but Orthodoxy agree with the Catholic Church that part of the reason to get married is to have children. And if you don't want to have children with your future spouse, that signals there might be a problem. And that's something that needs to be explored before we go on to marriage, which is what I was getting at. It was the only semester that I got very bad reviews, awful reviews, in fact, that from that class. It was terribly amusing in a lose my job kind of way. But as spiritual fathers, it is incumbent upon us to make ourselves available to people to have this conversation, which means we've got to bring it up. Because if we don't, they likely will not. All right, so let's move on a little bit. I want to try to get out of here sooner rather than later. So here's a quick summary of pastoral guidance on contraception. And I appreciate a lot of what has said in For the Life of the World, but I think from a pastor's point of view, the basis of the social concept is much more helpful. So do look at that section. It is important to keep in mind as well is that any decision about contraception really does need to be mutual between the couple and it should be in consultation with you as the spiritual father. We in counseling couples on this issue, we need to take into consideration the couple's living situation, their age, their health, their spiritual maturity, and distinguish between those who can practice continence and those who cannot. So, want to change the subject now, having spent a long time talking about the blessing about love and children. I want to talk about the blessings beyond love and children, and specifically the economic implications of marriage. You know, in the service, we ask God to bless the couple with love, long life, fidelity, and surprisingly, wealth. We ask that they see their children's children, that they be protected, but also that they have abundant material and spiritual blessings, so that the couple can be generous and charitable and fulfilling all the supplications unto salvation. So let's now turn to our last theme, the economic implications of marriage. For the life of the world, observation that the family is a microcosm of the larger society is important for understanding not only the church's social ethic, but her social witness. We should keep in mind that the blessings we ask God to give the couple are not limited to love and babies. Along with these, like I said a moment ago, we ask God to grant the couple a long life, that they practice conjugal chastity, mutual fidelity, but also that they have a certain amount of material wealth. In other words, we ask God to make the couple not just happy, but in a real sense, rich. And what I mean by rich in this context is that they have everything they need to not only raise their children in a modest but decent, according to a modest but decent standard of living, but that they also have the wherewithal to be hospitable, to welcome people into their homes, not only for celebrations, but also in philanthropy, but they're able to give to the poor, they'd be able to give to the church. And so what do we ask? We ask that God account the couple worthy to see their children's children, and that their wedlock be kept safe against every hostile scheme. We ask that they have grace from heaven above, but also the fatness of the earth. We ask that God fill their houses with bountiful food and every good thing that they may have to give to them that are in need, bestowing also on them that are here assembled with us all their supplications that are unto salvation. So we hope, we fervently hope, let me bring my smiley face up there, that the couple have the wherewithal to be not just charitable but generous in their charity. So without prejudice to other means of philanthropy, the wedding service asks God to bestow wealth on the newly married couple so that they can help others. Again, we're not asking God to bless the couple to make as much money as possible. Rather, and as part of the asceticism proper to marriage, we're asking God to grant them the grace to be able to work and exercise enough financial discipline so that they are both self-supporting and able to take part in the philanthropic work of the church. Yes, circumstances might make one or both of these goals difficult or even impossible, but this is different from refusing to be gainfully employed or care for the poor. So what we're concerned with here is, that the couple be able to not just support itself, but that it be able to be of benefit to those who are in need. So here's a list of some of the moral limits of economic pursuit as we see them in marriage. The cartoon, if you can't read the line underneath, is, I think being insanely wealthy has actually brought us closer together. That's not true in an absolute sense, but the reality is, marriage is easier if you have enough, if you're not always scrambling. But the economic, so to come back though, the economic dimension of marriage is not without moral limits. Again, the goal is not that the couple be as rich as possible, but rather that their economic and work life be lived within the context of their mutual love and in the service of their shared responsibility for whatever children God gives them. Again, because of circumstances, a couple may not be able to spend the amount or quality of time they wish with each other. Likewise, work, family obligations, and illness can all place a strain on a relationship between husband and wife. This, however, is different from one spouse ignoring or neglecting the other. At the same time, love does not mean that the couple spend every minute of the day with each other. What it does mean is that the couple cannot undermine the gift of love in pursuit of the economic dimension of marriage. So, what are we saying here is this. Both Basis and For the Life of the World emphasize that children are a gift from God and are an inherent part of marriage, both as a natural and a sacramental relationship. Raising children also places moral limits on the economic life of the couple. Work, both outside the home and inside, is in the service of providing for the material and spiritual blessings of the children. I don't have the citation ready to hand. That's unfortunate. But one of the things that's really quite interesting in Basis for the Social Concept is the document says that neither women nor men should be so focused on their careers, on work, that they neglect their fundamental vocation as husband, wife, father, mother. So those vocations, husband, father, wife, mother, place a limit on the kind of work that we can do outside the home. And by the way, at the risk of shocking you, it also places a limit on our ministries as priests. We cannot neglect our vocations as husbands and fathers because we say, oh, we're priests, and that's just primary. Cannot do it. If married couples need to have that kind of integrity in their marriage and with their children, priests surely ought to have it. I almost said something inappropriate. So let me just leave you with this. Here's a quick list of the threefold moral goods of marriage. That's love, children, and wealth. And that comes with it. That pertains to both marriage as both a natural institution and as a relationship in Christ. Reducing marriage to only one or two of these aspects, love or children, wealth or children, whatever, is to really fundamentally misunderstand the nature of marriage. The moral challenge in marriage is balancing responsibilities, the responsibilities of marriage life, and keeping in mind that sometimes God's will or circumstances will affect the kinds of blessings that we're able to receive. Finally, there needs to be fidelity to the vocation of marriage. Couple needs to live together without sin and with a pure heart, keeping the commandments of God. But to come back to it, when we look at marriage, we get a sense of the church's social witness, but when we reflect on it, we also get a sense of it also brings with it certain moral limits that sometimes it's easy to overlook. And this is especially the case in the American culture, where we tend, I think, to romanticize and overemphasize marriage. So we will say things like, "Oh, family comes first, family before everything else." Well, that's not true. Family doesn't come before Christ. Jesus said it in the gospel. Family doesn't come before our obligation to be able to care for ourselves and to care for the poor. Family is the context within which we learn to love Christ. Family is the context within which we learn to love one another. Family is the context within which we learn to love and care for the poor. And marriage and family life is really the fundamental social witness of the church. Okay, we're going to stop here, and I'm going to send you in the next day or two some expectations for the oral final when we're all in New Jersey next month. Yay! Looking forward to seeing all you guys again. And I got an undergraduate here, so I gotta go back and do my other job, my priest job. See, it's just like what I said. I cannot neglect being a priest because I'm a professor. but I can't neglect being a professor because I'm a priest. I got to figure out how to balance it. That's it, man. That's what happens in marriage is just what happens in the whole rest of life. All right. God bless everyone. And if you have not gotten those essays into me, get them in. Thank you. Appreciate it. You guys are great. Talk to you later.